Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. In wartime, there's a great impetus for scientists to develop and refine new discoveries and new technologies. Now, it's not just warfare that does this. When you're working hard for one goal, everyone pulls together. An example would be whenever the Americans determined to go to the moon, and all the research that was necessary for that produced many inventions that today we still use in everyday life. Well, during World War II, it was a bit like that. The pressure to win this war and develop these new technologies meant scientists were working round the clock. And some examples of that would be radar. You know, the fact that if you've ever flown in a plane at night or landed during fog, you can be grateful for radar. That was something that was developed by British scientists during World War II to aid the fighter pilots. In fact, the British deliberately obscured the discovery. They didn't want the Germans discovering the same thing. And so they actually said that the reason why the British pilots were doing so well at fighting in the dark was they were eating carrots. And the carrots were helping their eyesight to see in the dark. And so the poor Luftwaffe pilots were forced by their bosses to eat carrots every day with every meal. But another invention, of course, was developing the atomic bomb. But one that's probably less well known is that of penicillin. Now, penicillin had been discovered back in 1928 by Alexander Fleming, but it really was refined and first brought into mass use as an antibiotic during the Second World War. And Winston Churchill launched a campaign to get huge amounts of penicillin produced, particularly before D-Day, because they knew there were going to be a lot of casualties at D-Day, and penicillin had been shown to be particularly effective at fighting the bacteria that caused gangrene. So D-Day took place, and sure enough, loads of soldiers were wounded and injured and were treated with penicillin. Now, of course, with an antibiotic, you have to take a course of it and complete it. And so what they did at the battlefield, anyone that had a wound that could possibly get infected, they treated them with the first dose of penicillin, then got them back across the English Channel into England, and there they could continue with a course of treatment. Now, one way that they tried to ensure that they did this correctly and efficiently with the huge numbers that were involved was any soldier that had received his first shot of penicillin was given a yellow sticker, and he put the yellow sticker on his uniform. And when they landed in England, the people that had the yellow stickers then got more penicillin shots, completed the course of treatment, and were able to avoid contracting gangrene and dying from their wounds getting infected. But there was just one problem. At that stage, this was still quite early in its development, and they were using something called yellow penicillin, and they were administering it by injection, and the injections were extremely painful. And some of the soldiers, when they got that first injection of penicillin, found it so painful, they're thinking this is some unknown drug that they've never used before, and they actually ripped the yellow stickers off their uniforms because they didn't want to get more painful injections when they landed back in England. And some of those soldiers subsequently contracted gangrene and died from the infections in their wounds. A death that was unnecessary, a death that could have been avoided, but they actually, unwittingly, they had rejected life and caused their own deaths by tearing these yellow stickers off their uniforms because they didn't want another painful injection. You know, it's a tragic story, but it's no more tragic than people that reject the gospel of Jesus Christ because they feel it's going to be painful. They feel, well, I've got to give up something. I've got to stop doing this. I've got to cut this out of my life. There's going to have to be changes. And they see those things as being painful and therefore refuse to take the step that would save their life. It's a step that causes death, not just physical death, but indeed eternal spiritual death. Well, I want to say this, that I came to Christ when I was 18 years old, and at the time I thought I was giving up a lot of things in my life. But I've soon discovered that anything that I gave up to follow Jesus wasn't really worth having in the first place. That what I thought was going to be a painful renunciation of certain things I was doing ended up not to be painful at all. In fact, it embraced things that would give me joy and give me peace and give me life. And so I was able to choose life rather than death. And I would just encourage you today, if you don't know Jesus, choose life, and encourage those around you to choose life, not death. To choose Jesus is not painful. It's a pathway to joy, blessing, and eternal salvation in Jesus' name. Thank you for joining us for this 5-minute message from Solid Rock Drogheda. Join us again tomorrow for another Take 5.